Okay, I think I'm going to go ahead and get us started here. Welcome, everybody. Thanks to everyone for joining. We have, again, people from horse enthusiasts from all over the world who are interested in our series, and just wanted to say welcome to you all. My name is Sarah Bassman. I'm the event organizer of the series and your liaison to Cornell's Equine Hospital. Feel free to reach out to me during the seminar, and my colleague, one of the panelists here is Dr. Lindsay Goodale. We will be monitoring the Q&A, and you can also reach out to me anytime with questions or comments about the series, topic ideas, assistance in arranging any veterinary care you might need for your horse at Cornell. I did want to let you know that next month on April 20th, Dr. Joy Tomlinson will be presenting on equine asthma. So I will pop that. We do have the registration live, so I will pop that in the chat if you want to get registered for next month's. And with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jillian Perkins to say a quick hello. She's the director of the Equine Hospital.
Hi, thanks everybody for coming here tonight, or virtually being here, I guess. We're all starting to feel that spring weather, and we're happy to have Steve here, not riding his horse tonight. And so thanks for being here. As Sarah mentioned, I'm the hospital director of the large animal hospital here. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Steve, who is a great friend and colleague. He is obviously a farrier and a Cornell alum. I won't say what year. And he is a certified journeyman farrier. He came to Cornell about 10 years ago, and it was lucky for us that he did. He's been running our farrier program where he sees clients directly. And then he also sees and helps us in the clinic with any really challenging cases that also need hoof care. And then he teaches a bunch of students the art of farriery. He has a 16-week course and runs that about 3 times per year, and really does a wonderful job training the future farriers. He is an avid polo player and someone who is a true horseman. And he has helped so many horses in so many ways, riders as well. And like I said, budding farriers. I'm proud to work with Steve, and I trust you'll enjoy his talk this evening. So thanks so much. Hey, did I miss the part about you being inducted into the International Farriers Hall of Fame? I think I did, actually. That was like, I was supposed to go back up to that one. So, you know, he's a very accomplished farrier, even in the International Hall of Fame. So congratulations, Steve, and we look forward to hearing from you tonight.
Thank you. There is an actual Hall of Fame. It's actually in Kentucky, right next. It's in the Kentucky Derby Museum, right next to Churchill Downs, and in Louisville. And there's a lot of 2 other Cornell farriers inducted in the Hall of Fame. Also, Mike Wildenstein and Buster Conklin are both in the Hall of Fame too. So I'm proud to be there with them. So we're going to talk about some geometry tonight and how I use it to think about and help a horse's hind end. And if you remember back in junior high school or high school, whenever you had to take this stuff, you were wondering, why am I sitting here? This is boring. How am I ever going to use this stuff again? And but here I use it all the time. And geometric principles are very important when we're thinking and looking about horses and thinking about how to deal with things and look at horses so to prevent problems. As a horseman and a polo player, I really have developed a lot of critical thinking about what I want to see in horses, and a lot of it adheres to geometric principles. So we're going to go over some of this stuff tonight to help you start thinking about whether it be your own horses. And whenever I do this, people want to run right out to their barn and look at their horse and go, oh my God, you know, what do I have? No, there's stuff we can manage, but when you have a choice of selecting new horses, you should have some critical thinking going on. So we'll start off, and okay, my computer just froze up. What am I doing here? Oh, there it goes. Okay, so how should we look at the hind? Oh, is that okay? How should we look at the hind end of the horse? The hind end is quite often neglected, and there's reasons for that. We tend to like to approach horses from the front. We like to make eye contact. There's a lot of obsession, I think, about looking at the horse's head, his stance, his posture in front, how upright he is, how erect the ears are, all these things. And we do like to make eye contact, just like we like to look at people and when we meet people. And, you know, it's actually not very polite to like walk around and look at someone's from behind. So we have a tendency to be focused on the front end of the horse all the time. And the tail quite often is in our way of seeing what we need to see on the hind end. So that also obscures our view. So we tend to like, you know, okay, there's the hind end, big deal, there's the tail. And in order to see the hind end properly, we need to pull the tail out of the way. And so do we want to walk up behind a strange horse and grab his tail and get a foot in our face? No. So we tend to pretty much ignore that hind end. But we really need to move the tail or have a way to look at the hind end that makes sense so we can actually see it. And as a performance horse person, I think the hind end is way more important than the front end. And so, and you'll see what I mean as we go on here. And so why is understanding how the horse uses the hind end important? We need to understand how the hind end actually works because it works different from the front end. And so, and then we have to have an idea of what constitute improper hind end conformation. So we know what, and we have to know what proper hind end conformation is. So how far from faulty conformation is this hind end? Because there aren't any perfect horses around. And then certainly, depending on what you're doing with the horse, if you're just trail riding around, you need a horse that's safe. And how athletic he is secondary. But certain disciplines in sports, you have to have a good hind end to do well. And you have to understand what happens when the hind end is not conformed properly and the problems you're very likely to have. And so how do we help the hind end with trimming and shoeing? And that's my business because we get to see a lot of horses that are not performing well or are lame, and people, you know, want, you know, us to salvage something here. And so when we shoe the hind end properly, an amazing thing happens, and we see this over and over again. We take the strain off the front end, and the horse actually moves better. And one of the problems that I've gotten to see over the years is I've been called about horses being sore and not right. And when horses come into the hospital for lameness evaluations, and you're being told that the horse is not right, he's lame on front, so the focus is on the front end. And then I'm saying, gee, how can this horse be sound with this hind end either faulty conformation or the shoeing is not actually helping? And maybe you can diagnose the problem better if you would fix the hind end before you start looking at the front end. And it's amazing how many horses have responded in a positive way and were actually not lame in front, but they were sore in front because they were not able to use their hind end. And so what happens here is
Hey, Steve, if you can hear me, I can't hear you. I'm still not hearing you. I'll let you know when I hear you again.
hit something.
There you go. Yeah.
I must have hit this little mute button.
Yeah. Can you start at the beginning of this slide, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
Our goals are, put this where I won't hit it. Our goals are understanding how the hind end works, learning where conformational defects come from, recognizing these defects in the mature horse, and that's who we're going to be talking about. I have a whole other talk on recognizing them in, in foals. What are their consequences to soundness? Shoeing strategies to manage conformational defects. And so I'm going to start off with talking about my friend Stephen O'Grady, veterinarian down in Virginia, a really, really smart guy. He's a farrier as well as veterinarian. He's actually a little older than me, so he's been at it a while. He has a great website, Virginia Therapeutic Farriery. And I'm going to quote Dr. O'Grady. And if you can't read this, and this is his quote: "Farrier for the hind limbs of the horse has not been studied to the extent of farriery for the forelimbs. There is minimal information published on clinical information or research literature." And I agree with that, because the focus is all on the front end and at the neglect of the hind end. These are some of his photos, and these are some of the geometric proportions and principles that he uses, which are the same as things that I use. Hind limbs do not suffer the same foot damage as forelimbs to the fact that front feet bear more weight versus hind legs being used for propulsion. So the horse uses himself in two different ways from end to end, and the shoeing cannot be standardized for both ends. And that's the mistake that farriers make a lot. And so the horse is a rear-wheel drive machine. And we have to think about how this horse deploys these forces. And in order to, get these forces deployed properly, the horse needs a proper base, which I call good geometry, to use these forces. So if we start off with the hind end at number 1 here on the impact phase, we see a lot of braking forces and we see a lot of downward forces. And then in the support phase, all of a sudden, these forces start going back up the leg. And as the horse is coming over the balance point in the thrusting phase, he's pushing back down again. So you see these forces are constantly reversing. In figure 4, now we're in the swing phase where the forces are being generated further up the leg and thrusting downward. And then in phase 5 is the retraction phase where the horse is getting ready to land again. So you can see what is happening as this horse is propelling forward. And that's the horse's job, is to propel forward. And so I've been shoeing draft horses most of my career and worked for some pretty good hitches. And I started thinking more about the hind end actually when I was shoeing draft horses and listening to some of these older gentlemen who talked about how horses should be built and properly. And if you see this horse on the right, as a Clydesdale mare, you can see the plumb line coming down from the outside of his hips. And the horse is slightly base narrow, but the horse has pretty good conformation. We'll talk more about what proper conformation is, but the hocks are in, the cannon bones are parallel, and the feet are turned out slightly. And that is not cow hock, which is a mistake that a lot of people make. And so pulling power comes from proper geometric configuration of the hind end. The base needs to be under the hips, and the function is similar for all horses, for all disciplines, because that hind end functions like a piston. And if you want to have horses that really pull well, they have to do it from the hind end. If you've ever been to a horse pulling contest and you see where they hook up to the truck where they pull it backwards, and you see the top horses, they're moving in unison and they're both using their hind ends tremendously. And if you see some of the horses that are kind of there just for fun, quite often one horse is not pulling very well. He's letting the other horse do all the work. And if you go and look at that hind end of that horse after, that horse is usually not built very well. He cannot use the hind end. And so what is the proper hind end? Well, we think of proper geometry provides that good movement and soundness, because the proper hind end manages all these tremendous physical forces these horses use. And horseshoes are used to maintain and enhance the trim. So whatever we cannot do with the trim, and that's the basis of it, we need to provide with the horseshoe, and we'll talk about that. And when we modify horseshoes with different extensions or fitting one side fuller or doing toe modifications, we're trying to accomplish with the horseshoe what we're unable to do with the trim. And so it all starts with the trim. And so if we don't trim feet right, doesn't matter what kind of shoe, how expensive the shoe is, how well made the shoe is, what it's made out of, doesn't matter if we don't have a good trim. So we have to understand the trim before we can do anything right for the horse with the shoe. So it's the foundation of good geometry to align the bottom of the foot the best as possible with that load from above. And so the horseshoes actually protect what we trim, improve the geometry, and they aid in the weight distribution. And it's impossible to do this without a horseshoe. So being barefoot, if you have any type of hind end problems, not having shoes on does not help the horse. I see a lot of horses when I go to some local dressage show, they're shod in front and not behind, and they're not using their hind end. There's no stability. So horseshoes sometimes place metal where the foot isn't, but needs support. And if we look at the side view, and we call this the Z-axis here, we can see, and if you look at this slide on the left, you see that red arrow, and that's coming right down from the insertion of the extensor tendon. And that is just about cutting right through to the bottom tendon there, which is the deep flexor tendon. And that's a landmark for us. And if you look at the foot on the right with a shoe on, you see the dotted line right in front of the toe. If I didn't put a roll toe on this horse, which is a shoe modification, I could not achieve this golden ratio, which is approximately a 1/3, 2/3. So the big area, the big line from the heel to the arrow is the 2/3, and then the area from the arrow in front of that is the 1/3. So that's a horseshoe modification to help me get my golden ratio, which is what I want to trim to look like for the anterior posterior balance. And I can accomplish this with these calipers. And this from that vantage point that we talked about, that distance from the insertion of those two tendons is the same distance as the toe length. So that gives us an idea of what we need for toe length, where the front of the foot should be, and where the back of the foot should be. And if we look at this slide on the left before trimming, you can see how that golden ratio is not happening. We're almost at a 50-50. And if you look at the line behind the bulb of the foot, that's very unsupported part of the foot. So if that horse really loads, a rider makes the horse try and load that hind end, the horse is actually falling backwards. And so after just with the trim, I'm able to get my 1/3, 2/3, and there's less distance that needs support to the bulb of the heel. So I've accomplished most of what I wanted to do with the trim, and then I enhance it with the shoe. So what affects hind end movement? Certainly the conformation does, the conditioning and training of the horse, whether we have traction, which we apply with shoes, how we support the limbs with shoes, and the rider even affects the saddle fit and all that. A well-placed saddle, a well-balanced rider is also going to help or can go the other way if it's not that way. So all these things do affect hind end movement, how well we can get the horse on the bit. Sometimes training problems of the horse doesn't want to get on the bit are happening because the hind end is not functioning well. And sports and disciplines where it really matters, like dressage, jumping, polo, reining, racing, pulling and driving, all your performance activities where the horse is really collecting, galloping, stretching, hard stops and turns, and so on, are all really important to have a good hind end for this stuff. And so where does it start? So it starts in the foal. And we want to be able to correct the hind end while it's still possible, and we have a window to work with. And if you're going to spend all this time and money on raising a foal, you should have them assessed and get on top of anything that it's not correct on the foal's hind end or front end for that matter. And we start off with regular early corrective trimming. And if we do that regularly, we can actually save a lot of money and balance these feet. But if they need medial extensions or lateral extensions or caudal extensions, depending on where the conformation is not correct, we can actually leverage it a little bit before certain windows close. And so plumb lines have become very important. And if you just look at this building on the right, you know, we can't escape gravity, and the horse is dealing with gravity and momentum, especially when jumping fences and all that. So we can't escape that. So this is no different than the horse that's not balanced, having his feet underneath him. This barn or this shed will eventually collapse. So we have to think about where these plumb lines are and how this load is being balanced on a horse. And if we also look at how this varies with the intensity of the horse's gait, if you look just like at the medium trot, that's where the horse is really not using himself that much. But if you look at the top at the piaffe, and look how this horse is really loading that hind end, or look at the bottom at the extended trot, how this horse is thrusting, you can see how important it is that all these strenuous activity is loading these hocks and hips and stifles and fetlocks and all that. So you really need to have this proper geometry so that all these forces go up and down the leg properly. And so we're going to talk about the faulty hind end, what I call the bad geometry. And you got to remember, no horse is perfect, but plumb lines are important. And so we look at the horse from right from the hind end, which I call the x-axis, base narrow. Looking at from the side, which is the z-axis, is standing under. Looking at from the side again is camped out behind. Looking at the side again is post-legged. And then there's cow-hocked. That's again looking at from the back end. And then there's a thing called the right hind, and that's not the correct hind. And I'll talk about that at the end of this. And so common thinking. Most front end lameness is from the carpus or fetlock down. That's the farrier's job. Most hind end lameness is above the hock. Can the farrier help? I say yes. And sometimes I think the veterinarians forget this. So injuries and pathology of the hind end caused by bad physics and bad geometry are negative plantar angles of the coffin bone, ring bone of those lower limb joints, degenerative suspensory ligament disease, a curb, which is a ruptured plantar ligament, osteoarthritis of the hocks and stifle, and gluteal and back strains, which of course are quite often unrecognized. And as a farrier, I've learned to see what we call red flags, or sometimes it's a feel that I get that I know this horse is having problems. I've already assessed the horse and I could see what he might have, but now I'm feeling it. So lack of flexion when lifting up the hinds for shoeing. So if you pick up legs day in and day out and work on them, certain horses are a joy to work on. They let you get under them. They don't pull on you, and they relax, and they have no problems whatsoever. But when they start trying to pull us apart, and they're pulling our knees through our hind end, and they're just not relaxing and tight and everything, you would be surprised how that just tears us apart when we're doing that. And sometimes we use hoof stands to help that, so we don't have to lift them so high. But these are, again, the red flags that stuff's going on back there. Especially during the winter, if a horse is base narrow, and a lot of warm bloods are, and I'm nailing the shoes on, if I hammer very hard on the inside of the shoe, the horse flinches, because that's where all the arthritis is, further up in the hock. And I can hammer on the outside of the shoe when I'm driving the nails as hard as I want. Horse doesn't care. It's almost like going to the dentist when you have a toothache and he's tapping on your teeth with a tool, and he taps on the tooth that's okay and you don't hardly feel it. And then he taps on the tooth that you've got the toothache and you go, stop. Well, that's what the horse is doing when he's flinching on the inside. So we try not to hammer as hard when we feel that. And certainly we see wear patterns that are not normal, and that's a red flag that we should be looking at. What's going on with our trim, or what modification does the horse need? If we see bruising where it shouldn't be as we're trimming, that's also a red flag that we should be looking at things and making sure, why is this bruising there? And we see hoof distortion. There is a normal shape of most feet. Some are wider or narrower, but there's a right and a left. Most normal right feet or left feet are wider laterally from the midline of the shoe. When they're narrower laterally, then there's something not right. There's distortion. or if they're too wide from the midline of the foot, that's also distortion. So I'm going to start off with the base narrow horse, because that's the one I see a lot of. And these are the hooves are inside this hip plumb line. They get osteoarthritis in the hocks and stifle. They have a medial flare. That means they flare, underneath themselves, and they crush the lateral heel. That's not normal. And they have very poor hind end engagement. So this is a poor choice for any type of dressage, jumping, polo, reining, and so on. And so you see this horse on the left. This is when I'm talking about this geometry that I use. We see this upside down triangle from the hocks down to the hind feet. And you see that red dotted line, that's from approximately the center of the hip, and that is falling outside the foot. That's why the lateral heel is crushing. And the yellow line just gives you an idea of how much we are moved inside of a plumb line. And I looked up when I was shoeing this horse. This is in the farrier shop, and if you notice his front feet, I have a padded type shoe on, because this horse was presented to us with front end problems. And I'm looking up at this horse and I'm going, wow, this is a thoroughbred, and how much this, I've never seen a horse stand so base narrow. It's not even a big, wide, warm blood. And I said, this is a great picture. And I took it. And I had the student hold the tail and then walk the horse around. I wanted to see if this was normal. And we did this 3 times, took 3 pictures. And each time the horse settled down and was base narrow. So I took these pictures, and actually this picture marked up like this is on the front page of the American Farriers Journal last November. That's how nice this perfect shot was. And after I trimmed the horse and I removed the lateral flare, we did the same thing. Just like that, the horse is not standing base narrow quite as much. We improved it by a couple inches just with a trim. It's before we even shod the horse. And again, this is not set up. We walked the horse around 3 times and the horse never stood like that again. So it just shows you what a trim could do to improve the geometry. And some of the things we do, I know you're not farriers out here, but here's a wider lateral branch shoe that, we do to put some metal where the foot isn't. We actually even narrow the inside branch. And sometimes we even weld on a piece. You got to be careful with this, because too much extension could turn into leverage, which we don't want. And sometimes if a horse has that type of we have 2 conformational defects here. We could have a negative plantar angle and base narrow. I want to give the horse some more support. So this very odd looking shoe actually works pretty good. And again, it's a lateral type support shoe. The wide section is on the outside. And some of my friends come by, we talk about these, and some of these are beautiful handmade shoes that some of my friends, but you can see these are asymmetrical shoes. And I refer to this as designed imbalance. Here's another one. This halflinger came in lame behind, and you can see that left hock has all wrapped up because it just had hock injections. Now you can see that this horse is standing base narrow, and this horse would not load and stand comfortable. And we have a flared medial toe on this. And here are the radiographs off this horse. And the red circle shows where this horse had the arthritis severely on that left side. And has if you look at the balance of the foot here, we have a flare on to the inside, and we're crushed on the outside. Well, we want the coffin bone to be parallel. So again, quickly with a trim, I was able to trim off a lot on this horse. These halflingers grow a lot of hoof. I trimmed the flare and dressed it. You can see how big a piece I have. And there's the before picture. And just like that, now look how nice that horse is standing. We did both feet like that. So it just shows you where that extra wedge-shaped piece was. And now look, the horse is standing comfortable, just like that. So the trim is hugely important on these horses. Standing under is looking the side view of the horse with what I call the Z-axis. Hooves are too far forward of the hip plumb line. These horses are susceptible to a curb, which is a plantar ligament strain. They get underrun heels, and they either get a flat or that negative plantar angle I showed you earlier. And they have very, very poor thrusting ability for forward motion, for jumping, for polo. These horses are going to wreck themselves doing any of these hard sports. And so this is a more mature horse, but he's a really good example. And again, the dotted line shows you how far under buttocks the hocks are and feet are, and that solid yellow line is approximately coming down from the hip, and the graphic even shows you the skeleton that where we're trying to imagine these lines. And so before is on the left, and after I've improved the horse to some degree. I have more support, but I really can't change him that much. But this horse did move a lot better just with simple little changes. And if you look at some of the shoes we use, we call these extended heels. And you can see where I've marked the foot side of the shoe is that silver outline is where the foot actually ends, and we have the shoe extending behind the foot to put some metal where the foot isn't and needs to be. And this is the bottom view, and I'm using this to put the foot into that 1/3, 2/3 golden ratio. And I can't change the horse that much, but I could manage the foot, and the horse is just that much more comfortable. Here's another one. This horse is in the farrier shop. And again, hind end lameness. And the reason why I put this one up here, and if you look at the picture on the left, the tail is hanging there, and you really can't see what I'm talking about, even though I've been talking about it. But if I pull that tail up and then drop my plumb line, you can see that this horse's hocks is forward of the buttocks, and the feet are even that much more forward. So that's what I mean about the tail hiding what's important for us to see. And the other thing that's a good thing to look at on these horses is if you project this line from the coronary band, and that's going right up to the horse's stomach. And without a radiograph, I would bet money that this horse has a flat or negative plantar angle, because that line should actually be projected right to the center of the radius, or at least below the horse's elbow. So when I see horses like that, I know that this horse has got problems. And here's, what happens when the shoeing is not correct. You see that red triangle, that's a fulcrum. And if the horse is forced to load his hind end by a strong rider or a harsh bit, this horse is actually falling backwards. And that's, the horse doesn't want to fall backwards, so he's going to be resistant, and he's going to have back problems. And if you look at the radiograph on the right, again, that shoe is way too short for this horse, and you can see this tilting backwards of the side view of the coffin bone. And here are other examples of negative plantar angles where the coffin bone is tilting backwards. For a hind end, it should have a positive 3 to 6 degrees up, not flat and not tilting backwards. And so what we need to do for these guys is, again, put some kind of metal where the foot needs to be. So these extended heels work pretty good, but frog support of some sort is very helpful. We have a frog support pad on the shoe on the extreme left. We have what's called a heart bar insert with extended heels in the middle. And then we have another frog pad and extended heels on. And all these horses, when I do this, improve immediately. It's amazing how much better the horses feel when I do this. And here's another version I've used. We call this a center bar, and we have these ortho kits with all these inserts that make our job easier. So if I put that center bar in and put extended heels, it has a similar effect on artificial footing. We want to make sure that we're not sinking into the artificial footing. So some of these are very helpful when horses are being worked on artificial footing, giving them more base and not letting them sink backwards. So that's, we vary these things according to the horse's job and the type of footing the horse is in. Here's another one, standing under. Now, this is a real good case of a horse presented for front end lameness to our hospital. And they're blocking the horse and putting the lameness locator on it, and on and on and on, and spending all this time. And I walk by and I'm going, gee, look at that hind end. And they said, well, we can't figure anything out. You think you could do this? Yep, I will work on this horse for you. So if you look at these plumb lines here, and this horse is standing way under, and let me go back a second. So after shoeing, see the difference, how my hocks, I was able to bring the hocks back right under the buttocks. And I went up 2 sizes on the hind shoes. And this is a pretty expensive horse. He was used for 3-day eventing. And they brought him back into the hospital. And Dr. Ducharme says, this horse is sounder now than with any of the blocks we put on them. So this clearly was a hind end problem causing problems in the front. Another one, it's going in the opposite direction, actually, because either direction is bad. We have the camped out or strung out behind, and this again, side view. The hooves and hocks are behind that plumb line. They get gluteal and back strains, and they're susceptible to degenerative joint diseases. Hock and stifle, fetlock arthritis is also part of it. And these are the horses that are strung out, and they look like they're leaving their hind ends behind, which for some reason seems to be desirable in the hunter ring. And so some horses are shod for the hunters to make them be strung out, and then they wonder why they're lame. So here's another great example. Horse was in the hospital for front end lameness, and they couldn't figure things out. And I'm looking at this horse, and I'm going, my God, what a great example of a camped out hind end. I need to take pictures. And you see the graphic on the right. Again, here's the anatomy of it. Those hocks are way behind the buttocks. And so I mentioned, again, how can you do a lameness exam on front when this horse has so many problems behind? And you look at that flat red line on the top. You look at the lack of muscling this horse has. And so I put a wedge on this horse with a longer shoe and that will shift everything forward. And look at the difference with just a trim and the right shoe on there. Look how his hind end is rounder again. The horse is standing underneath. And then this was another case where we brought the horse back to the hospital and they couldn't find anything wrong with the front end. So here's our shoe, and here's outlined the way we're going to put it on. And so it's not just the wedge pad, it's the trim, it's the amount of shoe I'm using to give the horse more support. So it's a bunch of things happening at once. Post legs, we don't see too many of them, but the joints are too straight. The legs are way under the buttocks. They're very straight up and down. The horse is like a pogo stick back there. And these horses are susceptible to ring bone and chip fractures. They up and down the leg, you just name it, wherever they can damage themselves, they will. They're very upright, and they have powerful thrusts, but they injure themselves. So these are some pictures I actually pulled off the internet, and these are all post-legged horses. These are very, very bad choices for any type of performance work. But here's the winner right here. And this is a young horse. And I'm looking at this and going, how could anybody want to purchase this horse if they understood this kind of stuff? This horse is destined to have all kinds of problems. We can help them to some degree. We fit a rocker toe back there to give them, we're trying to transfer some motion to the ground that is not happening in the joints. But again, it's a very uphill battle. The cowhocked horse, we don't see a lot of cowhocked horses around anymore, and that's a deviation of both X and Y. Y-axis is the alignment of the bones and joints, whereas X-axis is your base wide and base narrow. So this is a combination of both axes being off. And so the hooves are wider than that plumb line. They're very susceptible to arthritis on the lateral hock, and just the opposite of the base narrow horse. And they get lateral hoof flares, and they interfere. They get lateral toe cracks because of all the strain. And here's not even a great example, but you see I have my right side up geometric triangle, and you can see how these plumb lines are going down. And a really well cowhocked horse has the hocks almost touching and the base wider than the hips, kind of like the graphic on the right. But we don't see any of them. And I guess people understand and can see cowhocks and seem to be able to discriminate against them, because we don't see as many of them as we used to. We can help them. Quite often cowhocked horses interfere. They're, especially when they're trotting fast. and they brush and hit themselves. So a trailer with a square toe kind of helps eliminate some of that interference, but it's kind of harsh on the horse too. So we might do it for a trotter on the racetrack, but this is a little more, a little softer toe, and a trailer would be a little more helpful to just keep the horse from hitting himself. And we talked about the right hind, and this is what we call the windswept horse. And I say it's the right hind because I see this type of conformation, I would say over 90% of the time on the right, not only in mature horses that haven't been taken care of right, but here's a foal doing the same thing on the left. So it's that windswept conformation that doesn't get taken care of when you're able to do that. And here's another, this is a 17-hand quarter horse who came to us with a huge hematoma on that right lateral side. And look at that plumb line. So that outside hoof on this foot was completely jamming up into the coronary band, creating a huge hematoma. The horse was really, really lame. And this horse had very, very light, very tight fitting, very small aluminum shoes on. Here's the radiograph here, where you can see where that's getting shoved right up into that coronary band. And again, he was a very good horse at what he does, but was completely useless. I drummeled this out prior to that. That was originally started at the coronary band when he had this huge hematoma to relieve it. And you can see how far I set the shoe to support him. And this is a frog support shoe also. So that horse is immediately more comfortable with this getup. And here he is further down the line. Things are growing forward more, and there's a wide branch lateral support shoe to help him. And what was interesting is the owner of this horse insisted you cannot show a horse, and he's a hunter champion in the quarter horse world, insisted you cannot show a horse without aluminum horseshoes on. And now, how could I put this big, heavy, wide shoe on? I said, you got to do this, otherwise you're going to be right back in the problem. And guess what? He went out and won all his classes with a big, wide, heavy shoe on. So obviously he didn't need the aluminum to do that. Kind of summing things up here. This is an old graphic out of an older textbook, and this is saying everything that I say that needs to be done. The hooves need to be under the hips. The cannon bones are, parallel. The balls of the hocks are slightly in, and you have a slight toe out. You can see the horse, the muscle, and the skeleton. Look how all that lines up exactly the way it's supposed to. And now here, this is a horse in my barn. So look, it's the same, especially, well, the view on the left is anyway. Look at that alignment, just like that horse in there. I've got the same alignment there. And look at the plumb line on the hocks to the fetlock to the buttocks. And this is a nice polo horse. And when I ride this horse, it's like being on a flying carpet. She is such a nice hitting platform. I can do anything I want. She stops and turns and gallops. And guess what? She's nearly 20 years old and never had a hock injection. Here's another horse of mine. I like to brag about my horses. Taz here is, I stopped playing polo on him at 30. He lived to be 34 till I euthanized him because he was going blind and teeth were getting bad. But he had these pictures. He was in his late 20s. Look at the natural self-carriage this horse has. So if you want good performance and long longevity, Taz was retired from the Cornell polo string to me, which is a great honor, but he won the string favorite several times and another award several times called the Iron Horse Award, which is the horse that goes the most number of practices during our season. So, kudos to Taz. So don't overcorrect when you have problems like this. You have to use common sense. Here is some of this crazy draft horse shoeing that we see that is the essence of overcorrecting, trying to make horses into something they're not. I'm not in agreement with this type of shoeing. It's ridiculous. It's distorted and crazy. So let's look at our take-home messages. Hind end conformation and soundness is diminished with faulty conformation. Physical forces can only be managed with proper geometry. Proper geometry is facilitated with trimming for hoof alignment for the load above. Horseshoes and modification enhance that geometry. Hind end engagement maintains front end soundness. And don't shoe hind feet like front feet. Thanks very much. I know there's a lot of you on here that are old friends of mine, and I'd like to shout out to say hi to you all. I haven't seen some of you in a long time, but hopefully we will see you again. And if you got any questions, I'll answer them. Just want to show you these. There's Taz out in that field. This is my gold. My horses are bring a tremendous amount of joy in my life. And Vincent has some parting words. Vincent had his ears frostbit before I got him, but he's playing polo at 20 years old. And, you know, his ears ain't pretty, but you don't ride the ears. So thanks again.
That's great. Thank you, Steve. We do have some questions. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump right in on them for our last few minutes here. If any more questions come up, feel free to pop them in the chat.
Sure.
Just kind of wanted to reaffirm, I think back to when we were talking to the dressage horses that are shoed on the front. Just the question was, so is there instability in the rear because only the fronts are shod?
Well, the horse is lacking the support it needs. I'm watching these horses move in the dressage ring, and it's not a matter of an imbalance from front to rear. It's the fact to do dressage, the horse needs to load and engage the hind end. And if the horse is not stable, he's only going to do it so much. The best way I can demonstrate, let me stand up, and I'm going to do some acrobatics here. I don't know if you could, I'm going to move my computer back a little bit. So a little bit further. So when I stand up here, and I know you can't see my feet, but if I am base narrow, I'm standing with my hocks together. My heels are the same as a horse's hocks. So what you can see is when I'm going to lift up my right leg, watch what happens to my left shoulder. See how it falls sideways? I'm trying to move forward, but I'm actually falling sideways because my base is being, you know, it's like an upside down triangle like I showed you earlier. But if I trim and shoe the horse properly and get the horse to open up and give a lateral support, so now I am moving my feet back under my shoulders. I'm taking my heels or hocks and pointing them back in. And now when I lift up, see how stable I am, and I could walk forward. So I immediately can move forward as opposed to swaying off to one side. So that's what shoes will do to a barefoot behind horse. They can engage their hind end if they're the right shoes, you know, put on, you know, in the right configuration. Does that make sense?
Yep. Thank you for the demonstration. Okay, a few more kind of outside of the realm here. Let's see. One just came in. If your horse's hinds scuff away the toe a bit barefoot, does it mean it's not working hard enough, or could it need a shoe with squared toe to keep it from wearing? A driving horse not driven on pavement.
Yeah, he's probably dragging his toes more than anything. So we got to help this horse activate his hocks more. And, you know, right off the bat, without having the horse there, but a horse doing that, what I do to help horses activate their hocks, especially older horses, is I put that rocker toe modification on them. And again, that's one of these things where I get amazing reports back. I can't believe how my horse is using his hind end. So if he's dragging his toe and not really, you know, lifting off, the rocker toe gives him mechanical assistance. And even though the horse is wearing the toe, so we're rockering it so the horse doesn't wear it away, but has that, you know, lift off that's much easier. So yeah, that would help that horse.
Okay. Here's one. What are some of the most frequently overlooked hoof problems?
Oh, I think feet not in balance, you know, for the horse's conformation is overlooked. Feet sometimes just get trimmed like we're trimming our fingernails. We're just taking excess away rather than how do we put a better foot on this horse. Better blood flow and so on all comes from doing this right, and healthier hooves happen. One thing that I think gets neglected a lot because we don't see it till it's a problem, and it's more prevalent than you think, is this disease called canker, because people don't recognize it. And we talk about how the fact that it's not around very much, but it starts out as usually a thrush infection, which is more of a degenerative problem, and then turns into a prolific problem because now the immune system gets involved and you get all kinds of organisms in there. And now the horse is trying to lay tissue down to protect himself. And so sometimes canker is not recognized as early as it should be.
Okay. How would you shoe the rear of a Tennessee, I think it's a Tennessee walking horse who has a 12-inch stride? He hits his front end all the time. I only trail ride.
What I often do with horses that are overreaching, and because you got to look at the conformation, it's hard to not, with not seeing the horse, it sometimes it's difficult to, say, okay, Steve said to do this, and maybe it's the wrong thing. But the main reason horses hit themselves in front, well, there's two reasons. Well, maybe there's three. Number one is a short back and long legs. We cannot change that. Number two is a poor fitting saddle, because the saddle is pinching the horse's shoulders and the horse is not moving out of the way. So that should be checked, or something the rider could be doing. So, that's also part of that equation. But then if all that is okay, and I have to shoe this horse, number one, I want to make sure that the toe length of his hinds is shorter than his fronts. So the relationship between front and hind should have a shorter toe by at least 1/4 of an inch than the front feet are. So that I can check that easily with a ruler. That's easy. Then I would also do things like put a longer shoe on, depending on what his conformation is, to keep him on the ground longer. Sometimes these horses are overstriding because they can't load, because they're either not conformed well to do it or they're not being helped with the shoeing. So they're stabbing their toes and bouncing off. And so the timing gets changed. So if the horse will stay on the ground longer behind, the front will get out of the way. So that's be my first go-to after looking at all these other things we talked about.
Okay, great. I'm going to let everybody know that we got some questions about a recording of this. So because you registered for this webinar, you will be getting a follow-up email with a link to the recording of this, as well as some additional resources on farrier-related topics. And so that will be coming your way. So I have one more question that was sent in by someone who registered about what is your advice for young aspiring farriers?
Okay, well, you can come to the Cornell Farrier School. We offer a 16-week course 3 times a year. The best thing to do is ride with another farrier to learn more about the business and the profession. But definitely, we have trained farriers from all over the country and even outside the country in the Farrier School. I'd like to brag right now that I have past 3 years in a row, I have had students winning what's called the Rising Shoeing Star Award, presented by the American Farriers Journal, that are, graduates from our school. And so I think, come and call me and talk to me and help you in any way we can. And we can also help your horses any way we can too. So either way, we're there to help people and help horses.
That's great. I think this will probably be our last question that came through the Q&A. I had a thoroughbred with canker and it was a tricky situation. Corrective/protective shoes were very helpful. Are early signs before it's a huge problem? Or are there early signs?
Yes.
Just keeping up on the thrush treatment, or are there other telltale signs?
Well, usually what we see with canker early on is the frog is kind of growing abnormally and it's been mashed down. So it doesn't look like a normal healthy frog, and it sort of has this crazy growth about it. And when farriers are trimming and trying to clean the frog up, and they all maybe want to make it look more normal, and they take a slight little slice out of it, bleeds like crazy. So now they're going, oh my God, I got to stop. Well, that would be a definite idea that there's, you know, something abnormal going on, and that can, at that stage, it's very manageable. When it gets to the point where this tissue is disrupting the heel structure and the frog structure and all that, and it's trying to, and it's blowing out the side of the foot, or it's wrecking the bars of the foot or the heel, then it's, you know, a longer process. So, you know, that is something, you know, you should, you know, raise a red flag about. If the frog is large, not, you know, a thrushy frog is sort of like sucked back in and have lots of little fissures. That might bleed too, but that's no big deal. That can be cleaned out and medicated. But if it's a nice big frog and it's cut and it bleeds a lot where it shouldn't, that would be more of a canker problem.
Thank you so much. We're getting a lot of thank yous coming through on the chat. Really appreciate the information that you're sending. I'll just reiterate again that yes, we're sending out an email after the fact to all registrants, and that the recordings of all of our seminars are on our YouTube playlist, which can also be found on the Equine Seminar Series webpage, which I'll put in the chat. So thank you everybody for coming, and I hope that you will join us again next month.
My pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Steve. Good night, everyone.
Yep. Thanks, Steve. That was great. Take care.